We are live. Hello and welcome to Community Manager Live. I'm David Dewald, Community Manager at Sienna.com. Each week, we typically bring a collection of community professionals together to discuss a topic suggested by our audience. But this week, we're trying something new. If you would like to chat along with us today, you can join us on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitch, where we can pull your questions and comments right into our stream. If you prefer to just watch or listen, you can do so on Twitter. And you can find links to all of those at the top of the page on the communitymanager.com. So this week we're doing something different. Like I said, this week we brought in Adrian Speyer because he put a new book out that I stupidly don't have the title for right in front of me. I'm kidding. It's The Accidental Community Manager, a guide to building a successful B2B community. So Adrian, say hello. Tell us about yourself briefly and what compelled you to write a book.
Woo! Hey, Kat. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Adrian. I'm the head of community at Higher Logic. But I think the most interesting aspect, for those that haven't read the book, I've been building communities for a very long time. I think someone told me that I was giving them PTSD talking about the 90s of internet web BBSs and things of this nature. So I've been doing it a really long time, and then I got paid to be a community manager, right? So then it kind of became a real thing. And so I've been doing it a long time. I've been on the platform vendor side since 2013. So I have a unique perspective, worked with hundreds and brands, launching, migrating, all kinds of things in between with community. So really excited. And I know we'll get a little bit into why I wrote the book, but the general thing was, and I've mentioned this to Tim in person, I had this wacky idea about time travel, and I really needed this book back in like the 2000s that I'm hoping at some point, if time travel ever becomes possible, that I can go back and leave this book on my desk and save me a lot of pain, heartache, and challenges in learning how to build communities.
Very good. Very good. I know we've got some people out there today chatting, and hopefully you guys will pop in with questions and comments when you have them. So, like I said, what was the impetus for the book? Let me back up because I'm stumbling all over my words here. First, let me say, and I think I've said this to you personally, is that this is the first community book that I feel like I could hand to somebody who has no experience. Has never done community management before, and it can really take them from zero to hero. It covers all of the basics. It doesn't go into the fine detail, but it covers them from a level that's close enough to that fine detail where the people that can pick up on it and really start moving. Most of the other community management books aren't quite as focused like yours is. So what made you decide to take that tact and that direction with the book?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a book I could probably only write in the sense that I started this 4 years ago, and at the time, there were certainly a lot of books out there even then, or not a lot, but there were enough books out there. And as I was writing it, I started to say to myself, what am I going to add to this, kind of tome of all these other wonderful books by Jono and Millington and Carrie Melissa Jones? Like what could be the differentiator? What is something that I felt was missing? And the one thing that I felt was missing was a first person account that kind of was a coach through, that was a bit of almost like a first person. And I think if you know me well enough, or if you've ever met me, I think the thing that most people have said is it sounds like I'm right next to you as you're building your community. And I wrote it that way. The point was I wanted it to feel that I think all of us would probably agree at some points in our careers, a community building can seem very lonely, in the sense that you're at a company and you're alone and you don't really have, the community of community managers are great. And we all are very supportive, but sometimes, you may have those moments where you're like, I really need to get an answer, and I'm maybe too embarrassed to ask the question, or, I think I opened the book talking about imposter syndrome or things of this nature. And I talk also a lot of failures that I've had in my, over the time. And I think that there's not enough content out there about it. Most people will talk about all their successes and the great things. And I just really wanted to create a personal book that kind of put all the advice, like if I was going to be vaporized off the earth tomorrow, did I leave everything on the field in this book? And that's essentially what my goal was. So, you know, as over the 4 years as I was writing it, I would have moments where I'd write things on scraps of paper, like, oh, you gotta, you know, because I originally started writing out a complete index, but then I realized there were certain things I needed to add later on that I was like, oh, you know what, I'm not talking about this, or I need to add that in. And thankfully, I have to give, you know, credit to my friends at Higher Logic Vanilla, that they supported me to put out the book, you know, because technically, you know, a lot of stuff was created during employment, but they were very, we arranged, you know, the ability for this book to come out and share a lot of stuff. Nothing proprietary in so much that sense, but it's really a gift to the community of community building, because I think that it's one of those books that, kind of like you were saying, David, there wasn't really an entry level book that I felt was like before all the other books. It kind of was, especially in B2B. I felt like the other areas were kind of covered really well, but there wasn't really someone coming from a voice of someone who had been working a couple of years and then kind of fell into, you know, I've run into so many people who were marketing managers before, or, you know, I have a history degree. You know, I didn't go to school to become a community manager. Kind of just fell into it. So it kind of just stuck with me as a name. And the accidental community manager, that's been the hardest thing not to tell anyone that I had the idea, the name of the book. Because if you look, I own the domain, theaccidentalcommunitymanager.com. I bought it several years ago, knowing that this was the title of the book. And I just had to keep it quiet this whole time. And I'm like, dying, please, no one publish a book with this title. Like it, and it, thankfully, no one did. And it's out there. So hopefully people enjoy it.
Yeah. So just one question I have, and I'm getting a little bit off of the community management, more into the publishing side, but do you think a lot of what you were able to say was because you self-published instead of having a traditional publisher kind of dictate, and, you know, probably the outline and everything in the book?
Well, I think what allowed me to do is it allowed me the time to be as happy as I could be with it. But I'll be honest, the first couple of years was really hard to find time to write it, because I was doing it outside of work hours to be respectful of, obviously, my employment. And then when COVID happened, I had a lot of time because my commute went away, that I had time before and after work to really start writing it. And so the COVID years, so to speak, this is the only good thing for me that's come out of COVID for the most part, was this book. And at some point, you also just go, I've been living with this book for so long and no one had really seen it, that I was like, at this point, I just have to publish it. So that was the only thing. Not having a publisher wasn't really someone going, hey, like, you know, that was the other thing too. Like, the longer I waited, the more it was like other people were coming out with books, and it was like, oh, you know, these are ideas or concepts I've had for years, but no one knows. Or, you know, people that I work with, who I interact with on a daily basis, or our customers knew, because I would do consulting and things of that nature, but it wasn't really out there. And I also think that one of the challenges I had is some people didn't realize that I was a community builder. Like, they thought I was just some guy that worked at a vendor and, you know, maybe was a talking head and hadn't actually done the work. And so this book kind of says, no, like, here, let me tell you all the things that I've done. And here are examples from my own work. So that, you know, I'm not quote unquote an imposter. You know, I know there's a lot of talking heads that say a lot of things, but they actually haven't done the work. And I'm not one of those people.
Very good.
So, and if you're watching, especially on YouTube or anywhere, and have read the book or haven't read the book and are prompted with a question, please just let us know, because we have one person here already, and we have another one coming in that have both read the book, that are going to be asking questions of Adrian. Nothing's planned. We don't have any pre-planned questions. So we would welcome you, even if you don't want to come on air and you just want to put it on YouTube, is the easiest place for us to get them and put them up on screen. We just want to, you know, put Adrian on the you know, hot seat here and ask him what the questions that he didn't prep him for.
Yep. I've got one here I'm going to pull up
Sure.
for us to take a look at. It's from the Info Diet Book Club. What is the most important framework you think is in the book that really speaks to the beginning community manager? How'd you distill that into a sensical thing? And that's probably talking about cargo or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go ahead.
to kind of clarify, the Information Diet Book Club focuses a lot on frameworks and the social science of community. But one of the big issues that the Information Diet Book Club has had is that there are a lot of community books out there, like Peter Block's Community Building Structure of Belonging, where it is so complicated and so up in the air. So I think this question is about simplification and speaking to the accidental community manager.
So to me, and it's funny that people always want to talk to me about span and cargo, but to me, they all lie on the basis of what I call the MVP principle. That to me is the bedrock of all community building. That to me is like that fundamental thing, which for whatever reason seems sometimes to get missed. And it's not minimal viable product. So, for those that haven't read the book, the idea is that it's most valuable people. And what I noticed was, and this is something I can credit Mark Zuckerberg for. I don't remember where I read it or at what point, but he was talking about when you're talking about building community, you don't talk about users and you don't talk about members, you talk about people. And it was really important to me that people really, when they're building, and I actually worked really hard to get to use the word people as much as possible, because it's a mindset when you're building these spaces to think about the people that are not only going to be in those spaces, but the people who you report to, the stakeholders, and the people that employ you, for the work that you're doing. And so the idea for the MVP principle is that you have two types. You have your internal people that you have to think about in terms of what are the things that they're trying to achieve to keep their careers going and be happy and all those kinds of things. And I guess there's also a third one, which would be yourself, right? Like you want to keep yourself employed and make people happy and achieve that. And then thirdly, it's the people that are coming to the community, what's the value, what's in it for them. And I just felt I had a special perspective, I guess, being on the platform side, because, most people only get, maybe, 5, 6, maybe 8 communities in a lifetime. I'm dealing with hundreds. So there would be tons of people that would come in and I'd always hear them saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do this. And I was like, well, did you talk to anyone? Like, did you actually talk to people that you're building this thing for? And it was really important for me that they would not only, sometimes they would listen too much to the internal folks and kind of build something and not talk to the external folks. Or sometimes people would talk too much to the external folks and not talk to the internal people. And they would build this really great community. And then someone would say, well, what's it doing for the company? What value are you bringing? And so the span and cargo frameworks then intersect in that way. The short version of what span was, and this also gets the perspective of what I see it being on the vendor side, was so many folks are so excited when they launch a community. They want to do all the things. And what's really important, I mean, certainly if you have an existing community, it's a totally different animal. But there were so many times people were like, I want to do product ideas. I want to do support. I want to do ambassadors. I want to do networking. I want to do all of it. And what I found was usually most community folks are a team of one or have limited resources, would burn themselves out because they're trying to do all the things. And they weren't able to crystal clear, kind of talk about all the questions that what is cargo in terms of answering them. So if you're going to create a support community, then what's your concept? And then if your concept, how are you going to tell people or acquire them? How are you going to retain them? What kind of things are you going to do? And then what are those goals and outcomes? And I found a lot of times what would happen is people would have a concept that wouldn't match the goals and outcome. Like they talk about, we want to create a support community, but then their goals was the word I hate the most, engagement, which meant nothing. And it's like, well, if your goal is support, what does that mean? And I'll steal ahead because, David, I see that question about what the cargo model is. So cargo model means it's an acronym for 5 questions that one needs to use before they ship the community. And I explained it in the book. So cargo stands for concept, in terms of what is your concept that you're creating around your community. So like, what is the mission statement or the reason that it exists? A stands for acquisition. How are you going to let people know that this exists? For example, is it going to be on the website that people can get in? R is about retention. What are the things that you're going to do to get people to come back on a regular basis so that it has that stickiness and makes sense? Then the goals for G are the measurables, and I like SMART goals that are tied to stakeholder benefits, and then outcomes being this, the kind of thing that ties it together. And I always look at it like a 5-weighted diagrams, so to speak, that they all kind of go together. Like if you have an outcome and your concept doesn't meet your outcomes, then maybe you have to change your concept. If you're acquiring people but you're not able to retain them, maybe there's something that needs to be done there. So there's all these mixed things, and I go really in depth in the book about the various ways to kind of build that out, because to me it's an essential thing. And every time that I saw a community not answer those questions was usually when things went sour. So if they had a really solid concept and they were really good at acquisition, but they had horrible retention, then what would end up happening is we'd have a conversation where they'd say, yeah, people are coming to the community, but they're not returning, and there doesn't seem to be getting any traction on it, and our goals are not doing well. And then you could look, sometimes you would say, oh, like, wait a second, your concept's a little off. And I think the example I use in the book, and the one I've used giving talks about cargo, is like if someone was, let's say Crest decided to create a community, and if they did a one about toothpaste, it would be a horrible community. Like, no one's coming to a community about toothpaste. I'm sorry. But I mean, dental health is something that we can all think about, that, that we have pain, or maybe want to get, teeth whitening or braces or headgear, or have that conversation. And if Crest or the company that owns Crest, I think it's still Procter & Gamble, was to create a community powered by Crest and then have a dental health community, that would do really well. And they could have a separate section for dentists, and there's like an endless way that could be done. Certainly you wouldn't start right away with all those elements, but you can see how you could build an item in there. And then they could what would be something that would be measured? Well, the concept is to create a place for dental health, and then maybe the goal is about brand awareness or increasing affinity to the brand of some sort.
Very
Sorry.
good.
Yeah, hopefully I know it was a long answer, but hopefully it covered it all.
No. Can you run through SPAN real quick too?
Oh yeah. So SPAN is basically it's 4 quadrants, at least in the B2B space, that I noticed that most communities fall into. And if you look at the diagram in the book, I made it as a puzzle, because all of them are interconnected. And that's the thing. I don't want people thinking, oh, I can just do one or the other. But most B2B communities, SPAN stands for support, P stands for product, A stands for ambassadors or advocates, and N is the network aspect. And usually that's like the communities of practice and things of this nature that kind of aren't really product, and they're not really support, but it's about that network effect of connection, and some of the other ones that would go in there. So that was the idea, to kind of say to folks, like, if you're going to do something, focus on one. And I had a lot of experience with that. Even our own internal success community that we had at Higher Logic Vanilla, when we first launched it, we were like, oh, we're going to do a support community. And you know what? It just didn't capture, because people wanted to keep giving product ideas. And it was just that natural thing. I think Millington, Richard Millington, he talked about this. And I'm also a big believer in this. And this is not anything new under the sun, but sometimes you have to go with the, as a leaf on the river. If your community is telling you that this is what they want or how they want to engage with you, trying to kind of redirect isn't always possible. So the sense is, we looked at it and they want to talk product. So we went to product. And once we were able to get critical mass on product and kind of satisfy that need, we were then at the point of maturity, which we were hitting our goals that we had measured in our cargo plan, that we could then move into doing support. And we're right now in the maturity of our success community. We're at the ambassador stage, that we're doing we did the networking, and now we're just starting into the ambassador stage of identifying, building a program, figuring out what the value is internally, and kind of working through all that. And every community will kind of do it differently, which is one of the things I love in the book, that I'm happy that a lot of people will see, is the life cycle that I put in there, because I think that one of the things that used to drive me crazy about all the other life cycles were out there, they all had them tied to numerics. And I really wanted to look on behaviors. What are the behaviors that people are doing in the community in terms of what the work you're doing? And then what are the graduating tasks that you're going to that next level, and kind of look at it that way. Because I felt like a lot of folks were getting hung up on how many people, how many posts. And it's like, well, is your community manager answering every post? Well, then you're still in an introduction kind of phase, right? Like if you're at a point where you're kind of just watching and making sure that you don't have to, boot people out, then you're kind of, heading towards that maturity thing,
So we got a couple questions coming in, Adrian. So Bridget is asking what advice you would have for a health insurance company for member engagement.
Yeah. So this always becomes a difficult
You're on
thing.
the spot. You're on the spot now.
Well, no, but I mean, I always put it, in terms of member engagement, what does that look like, right?
Right.
In terms of what are you trying to achieve, and what are you building it for? Like, that's what I would ask. Is the thing that most people do is they start backwards in terms of the goals that they want for their company. And I would say, well, what are your members or people in your community, what would help them be more successful? I don't know if you're talking about customers or talking about executives. I've seen some communities that are really successful. They'll offer programming for the people that are, we'll use the word engage, who are engaged. They'll get certification, or they'll get education, or they'll get certain valuable benefits that come to being part of the community, access to certain individuals, those kinds of things. So I would say you want to look at the programming and the value, and you will only get that from a conversation with the community to understand what are those elements that are driving them to have those conversations.
I guess for me, just as a throw it out there kind of idea, because it's health insurance, anything for cost reduction would probably be good stuff. Reducing for those of us that are in the United States, let me say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were things, obviously anything health related, the health insurance company's goal is to keep costs down for themselves, obviously. And so anything that would be, healthy lifestyle content might be good to get out there. You may not get a lot of engagement on it, but those kinds of the things that just come to mind quickly.
Well, I mean, it goes back to my Crest problem before, right? I mean,
yeah.
Does it make sense for Crest to have a community about toothpaste? So does it make sense for the health insurance company to have a community about health insurance? Or to your point, is it about healthy living and, dieting and exercise and living a healthy life and things that brought to you by whatever this health insurance company is? But I don't know, maybe it's a health insurance community for health insurance providers, or maybe it's, my wife's a nurse, maybe it's for nurses. I don't know. I mean, that's there's a lot of different ways it can go.
One of the big parts that I talk about is the coffee table problem, which is effectively if you have a crafts coffee table and you build a specific product, you don't want to build a product community around a coffee table. But what you can do is you can talk about specific areas of interest, like DIY is a good example. What is the coffee table actually being used for? Interior design. And I think a really, really great company of example for the coffee table problem is Wormwood Gaming, because you'll notice that nowhere in that title for that company does it actually say we make gaming tables. It's about the dice and running the interaction of the game, and they lean very, very heavily into D&D, which is what built a large majority of their community. And then they have this live streaming program called Worm Life, which is an internal context where the people who are actually making the tables are the stars. And the notion is, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to build this? And every single time they're talking about a table, they're talking about what it's going to be used for and whether the fans will get excited.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
So we have another question from YouTube from Shy Alter, who's asking, how do you set expectations with your community about its nature, whether that be support, product, etc.?
Yeah, so I think it gets down to, having that conversation and having authenticity and transparency on those elements. The thing is, and it goes a little bit back to what I was talking about with the MVP principle, in the sense that if let's say you decide that you're creating a support community, right, and your stakeholder decision is about ticket deflection, for example, right, which is a metric. You don't go to your community and say, hey, you're here to help us support tickets. That's a really, that's a horrible way to go ahead and build a community. The idea is, like, we want you to share your expertise. We want to, work together to help one another to be more successful, right? It's all about the language and positioning and creating those opportunities for that discussion to happen. At the same time as well, I think most people will know about the expectation. I think transparency in that as well. I know that there are some really great communities that out front will put, like, right on their homepage, if you put a question in our community, you can expect an answer within this set period. If you're talking about a product community, we've done a lot of research on this at Higher Logic Vanilla about the fact that it's not that you accept ideas. That doesn't matter. People don't care if you accept their ideas that they give in a product community. What they care about is that they're heard. The fact that you kind of say, hey, thanks for the idea. We've considered it. We can't do it. Or, hey, it's a great idea. We're going to have to look at it in the future. And so I would just say that, and what that comes down to is having a program of, saying, hey, we're going to respond to you quarterly. We're going to respond to you monthly. Most people expect at least a response within the quarter. That's from our research that we know that. But they want some sort of acknowledgement that they've spent the time to put in the feedback at some point. So that to me is the main key. And then if you're worried, and I talk about this in the book, if you're worried that you're going to have tons and tons of ideas, then, be very specific in the type of feedback that you're looking for. So if you're a huge telecom company, which one I worked with, and they're like, we're going to get too many ideas. So I said, well, then just focus on the one or two areas that you want. So, 1 month they did it on long distance plans. They want some feedback on how they could, be better. And it was really focused on that. It's not that they didn't accept any other ideas. They were just very clear that this is the month that we're focused on this. This is what we're going to respond to at the end of the quarter. We'll come back. We'll have our, the things that we can do, the things that we can't, why or why not. And I think it was really successful for them in that way. So that's kind of, I guess, a long-winded answer, but hopefully that answered it for you.
I was going to say one question that I had, and it's kind of, I'd like you to maybe expand on it a little bit, more than a question, but, and we were kind of joking about it before we actually went live, but, I remember vividly reading a part where you said, don't be afraid of negative comments, right? And explain what you meant by that and why it's so important. Because I just remember, like, at HuffPost, when I was in charge of our moderation team, we had a saying, don't feed the trolls, and which is kind of counter to what your advice was. But I would love for you to kind of, share a little bit about why that's so important in communities.
Yeah, so I think the primary thing that you have to start with is that this book was written for B2B communities specifically. And in our research and just in general, what we found is people, when they're going to buy a product, will do research about a company. And one of the things they'll look at is how do they respond to those folks that don't have nice things to say. And the other reality is, if you're not creating that space for that conversation to happen, they will go to Reddit, they will go to Twitter, they will go to Facebook, they will go to all those places. And I always say, is like, look, those places are fine, but I mean, at the same time, you don't know who those folks are. Could be your competitor. I think I told a story in the book, or maybe I cut it, I don't even remember. Was there was a site early on that we were getting reviews about our software, and we were getting really bad reviews, like 1-star reviews. And we're like, who's giving us these bad reviews? And what was funny was, at some point, what happened is the software changed the way that the reviews were done, and they identified the folks via their LinkedIn profile that had left the review. Like, they turned it on at one point, and it turned to be all our competitors at this one specific company had gone in and swarmed and gave them 1-star reviews. So then we contacted the company. We're like, well, hey, there's something obviously not right with these reviews. They're our competitor and shouldn't be reviewing our stuff. So they removed them. But it kind of brought to me that home. The thought is, you don't know if someone goes on Facebook or Reddit or those places are easy to create accounts. Like, oh, this is a horrible, like, I almost burnt down my house using your barbecue. It's horrible. It's like, wait a second, who is this person? So and the thing is, at least in the community, what I always found was important is there are so many companies that are so nervous about negative reviews. But you know what? Usually, if people are passionate, they built the right community, their own community members will come to their defense and help. So I saw this. I don't want to name who the company is, but they had a model where they were doing a license, and they went to what do you call it? A subscription model, right? Which a lot of people hate now, right? Because it's like, oh God, another subscription. And they did as best they could with their messaging, but it was kind of unclear, and some people were really upset. And they went into the community. There was some very salty posts, let's put it that way. But what ended up happening was they were able to engage with them and kind of understand how to get their messaging better. And then eventually what started happening is even the people that were negative originally were like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And they were defending the company. Like, hey, as Joe explained, they were kind of coming in and saying, Okay, it makes sense, because you know what? The reason they're doing the subscription model is it's not sustainable for them to do a license model, because at the rate of change that's happening, you buy the license once for a lifetime, and the speed of the way that technology is changing, this company could be out of business in 4 years because they don't have a sustainable income that they're able to do. And that's the reason a lot of companies have gone to the subscription model. But when they were able to explain it, and also explain that they weren't taking away the people that bought the license, and that it would be supported as long as they could, support it technologically, because we know things change with technology. But there was enough lead time on it. It was a really great opportunity for them to engage in that. And actually, I for many years I was using examples blurred out of how the community kind of came to the savior of this brand. And so that's kind of where my heart was at about the negative comments. Certainly media is a totally different animal. So I need to point out that it's a B2B book that I'm giving this advice to.
Well, it's kind of funny though, you bring up that it's B2B, but I've worked most of my life not in B2B, but I have had some experience there. But it really, I think the book really explores is, even though it's specific to B2B and your experiences, it really can be applied to any type of community.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, I wanted to be my work experience came to B2B, but at Higher Logic Vanilla, I've worked with B2C and nonprofits and things of this nature. But I also wanted to be authentic to myself, and I thought it would be inauthentic for me to kind of say I'm an expert on all. Specifically, I know B2B communities really well, and that's why I wrote it the way I did. But that's not saying that there isn't advice for all types of communities. I hope that there is, but I also wanted to be careful that if someone was reading it from the non B2B would say, oh, that's totally wrong. Like, for example, what I think I'm a bit harsh is maybe the wrong word, but I'm a bit spicy about social media. I love social media. I spend a lot of time on it, but social media communities for a business, to me, are kind of it's a really not the best thing to do, in my view.
Carolyn, you have any comments on that?
Welcome.
The resident social expert.
Yes.
I'm not gonna hide.
Hi. Thank
Hi.
you guys for letting me join in late. here. I
Yeah, thank you
appreciate
for
the
joining us.
opportunity.
We appreciate it. As the resident SMS, I'm going to say SMS. Listen to me, social media guru. Haha. Do you have anything to say about social media communities?
I think Adrian's view on social media communities is one that's echoed across the community industry from people who have, veteran status in the community industry and have so much expertise, and like that body of work, right, built up in community. And a lot of people, like, I mean, in the first parts of your book, you're talking about communities that like predate social media, right? And communities you were part of, in college, in high school, and early days of the internet, which is just super, super cool. And now, as social media has started as like person to person, right? You're messaging your friends, you're updating your relationship status, and then it became very commercialized. I think there's a lot of people in the community industry that see it as the enemy of community because it can so easily be commodified, commercialized, paid ads, all that stuff, not focused on relationships. And I think there's definitely a use case for strategic social media community that can be built out for brands that you can then take off social media and build a really meaningful experience for your members that's based on behaviors you set on social media. But I mean, social media is also a cesspool and it's terrible.
Yeah.
I say that as a professional.
I think it depends. Go ahead. Go ahead, Adrian.
Well, I was just going to say, because I think I was clear in the book that I think you can have both. What my main concern ended up being was where people go and create these massive B2B communities on Facebook, and they don't think about the fact that now they've got to pay Facebook to get a hold of these folks. And I used to do marketing from the aspect of I mean, I'm sure you know this, right? Like Facebook advertising, you have all kinds of filters and data that you can, but you know what? You're building your community on there. You have access to none of that data, and it's kind of crazy. And so I'm just saying, so in my view, it was like, well, you can like, to me, Facebook's a great billboard, you know, in terms of letting people know and then driving into the community this more curated kind of conversation. So I wasn't, and hopefully it came across in the book. I wasn't saying it's a zero-sum game where you're like, do not do it,
No.
but it's
No.
yeah. No, I just want to be clear for those that haven't read it. Like, I'm not, you know, I just wanted to be clear for folks that it's just, I always run into a lot of folks. Oh, well, there was a huge brand, like massive brand I was on the phone with, and they're like, well, why don't we just use Facebook? And I was like, you're going to take that much risk with your brand just to do all your community? I'm like, I get you're a consumer brand and your customers are on there, but then you're going to, what they were going to create. I was like, you do not want to create this on Facebook. This is going to be like, you could use Facebook to tell people about it, but I mean, how are you going to curate it? How are you going to create that specialness about it? And you're taking a massive risk on this platform. You know, like, it's great if you got, like, I have a couple of hobby communities that I did. Like, I didn't talk about any of my stamp collecting stuff. I've had a stamp collecting community forever, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what Facebook is, in my view. Like, I wouldn't bring that into a forum because, you know, the audience is on Facebook. It makes sense. It's easy to upload images. You know, we do share all kinds of videos and really nerdy stuff that's I've talked way too much about stamp collecting. But,
that's all right. So,
you know, I know Chris Detzel's out there either watching the recording or he'll have some joke about stamp collecting because he just thinks it's hilarious. But you know, but that's an example to me where it's an appropriate space, because I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't, you know, if people come in, that's great. And Canada Post, like, I have like 12 Canada Post employees that are members of that community who like send me messages like, this is the best thing ever. Like, we get so much insight. Like, we're changing our programs. And
Whoa, that's awesome.
Like, yeah, like, I mean, but I could never pull that off on a forum. It wouldn't work,
right?
Because just the dynamic of the audience is, you know, skewing a little bit older. Let's be honest, right? Like, stamp collectors aren't in their 20s. I mean, there are a couple, but the majority are not.
So that does bring up a good question, in my opinion. What do you think the role of vendors in the community should be? How do you recommend a beginning community manager manages the relationship between most other community roles and vendors?
I'm not sure I understand.
So people who wish to advertise in the community, or companies that are entering into that community because they want to represent a brand or a company. So it's effectively vendors who are using that community in order to receive outreach.
Oh, I see.
Business benefit.
Yeah, like self-promotion kind of thing.
I'll let you go first. I can really speak to this one. So go ahead.
Please go ahead, David. I have a lot of
thoughts. So I not that I have a lot of thoughts, I just have experience with it. So I run you know, like Adrian, like any, I think, normal as normal as community managers can be. We all have kind of hobby communities because we like building communities. So we all have our hobbies and we're all involved in those communities if we're not running them and if we didn't create them ourselves. So I have a hobby community. It has to do with the company is Arcade One Up, which is basically in-home little miniature arcade machines. And there's a whole industry around taking the guts out of these, you know, that the manufacturer put in them, and putting in computers and Raspberry Pis and other things to run other software on them instead. And there's, you know, when that came up 4 years ago and started happening, a whole cottage industry of people decided, hey, I'm going to build stuff to make it easier to do that. So we have people that build new control decks. We had people that put new covers on stools, risers, and all kinds of things. And I run this community, and it's like, how do we balance this out? How do we let them participate without it turning into an advertisement for them every day of the week? And we set some, you know, ground rules down. And I actually went to the community and said, we're starting to see a lot of this. How do you think we should handle it? How many times a week can they post? You know, do they have to identify themselves? Yes or no? And that's what we did. So any vendor can join our community. They have to mark themselves with a, you know, flare. It's on Reddit, flare that says they're a vendor. Their posts have to be marked as vendor posts, just to double dip on them. And they can only post twice a week. And otherwise, they're free to engage completely in the community, and a lot of them do. So the thing is that you can only post twice a week about what you do and where you do it. But anytime somebody specifically asks you, you can always answer. So if somebody says, I'm trying to, who does the side art skin? Who's a good company for that? If somebody pops in and says, I use Brand X has every right to come in and say, hey, if you're really interested in, here's a 20% off coupon that everybody can use for the next week. And that's how we handled it. Discuss it within the community, let them make the decision of how it should be handled. And then at one point we actually had a separate subreddit completely for vendors, and it just didn't get used because nobody went there looking for stuff. So it's there, but we don't do anything with it. But that's how we handled it. It's worked out really well. We've not had any complaints from anybody. The vendors don't mind because they get to talk about the product every once in a while, and the users don't mind because it's easier to find their stuff. It's well marked in the community, so you can even search on just vendor posts, and it makes it real good. And that's how we've handled it. And then on the converse side, I worked with another product and another company, and they were complete jerks to the consumers that had maybe negative feedback or not positive feedback, we'll say. And I literally kicked them out of the community that's about their product. So, you just have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point.
Bold.
Well,
I've been doing the almost 25 years as a community manager. I'm at that, get off my lawn stage. And so I gave them access to the community, right? I said, here, come in. And the only rules are don't delete anything. Don't, we want this to be fairly inclusive. People are going to have negative, opinions, and you need to internalize them and make improvements to your product if that's feasible. Yeah, assholes, basically. And the first thing, they said, okay, fine, we won't do that. And then, everything's good for a few months. And then somebody went on a rant, and they deleted it, they removed it basically, and they banned the user. And I was like, nope, that's not happening. I unbanned the user, and I put the comment back, and I sent a message to them and said, what's going on here? You said you weren't going to do that. You were just here to, participate. And the relationship broke down, and they ended up making their own little community without me, and it was never as successful as mine, which, more power to them. But that brand has since gone to the wayside a little bit, and it's not what it was. So the community exists, but nobody ever posts to it anymore, and it's just floundering. They've decided to go into cryptocurrency and all kinds of other fun, dumb stuff. So,
yeah, it kind of happens, I guess. Specifically, I'll talk about my Stant community because hey, you gave me an opening there. The people from Canada Post are very respectful, and they're kind of just lurker. Mostly, I'll get private messages on Messenger that they'll be like, oh, this is interesting, or do you mind if I reach out to this person? I also have really clear rules about dealers and people selling. It's a no sell zone, because there are tons of other places that people can do selling. It's about stamp appreciation. And so if anyone steps out of bounds, thankfully it's gotten to the point that I've been doing this long enough that most people are kind of like, hey, you might want to remove this post before Adrian sees it. I'm a big fan of being very visible. Like, moderation to me is something that I like to, I set a really good culture in that community, and I think that's really important. I know some people are very hands off on that, but one of the things that people have always told me about what they enjoyed about that Snap community is I'm very present, and the other team members are very present. So it's set a kind of an expectation of, like, I remember the other day someone put up a very blurry photo, and they're like, no, like go get a better camera or remove it. Like, pretty much like I couldn't ask for anything better than that, right?
I love you bring up a great point, though, just in that little story you were sharing about how one of the other members said remove that before Adrian sees it, is because I think that's a sign of a really healthy community when you have people in the community that know the rules and help you enforce them, even if you're the one kind of running the community.
Yeah.
And it just, I love that, because I remember when I was at HuffPost, it was like when I got promoted, and it was like, you're in charge of all the comments. And I'm like, my predecessor was really active in the comments. I was not, and I didn't want to become active in there, but I just formed great relationships with a couple dozen of the members that were most active. And all I needed to do, and I know we joked about like being old and getting on the phone earlier. I think when you, Carolyn, when you were on earlier, but I used to use the phone and talk to them and actually tell them, you know, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's why, what do you guys think? And they'd share their feedback. I'd give it back to our product team, bring it back. And then they would go into the comments and tell all the other commenters about the behavior and the changes that were coming.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah. I was just, because I saw, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to answer Carolyn's question.
Yeah.
Please go ahead and I'll answer it after.
Oh, no, it's fine. Mine is actually also related to Carolyn's question, but also
There
the
you
prior
go.
question. So it might be a really, really good bridge. I think one of the big things that I try to talk about is the fact that it doesn't really matter what you do in community. If you're an architect, a manager, if you're just a coordinator, if you're just doing engagement, if you're a consultant, doesn't matter. All jobs in community boil down to two things. The first one is setting precedent to do a thing. I think that this would be healthier for the community, and then building momentum until that thing is being done by the community itself. And like the notion of a community self-policing is like a perfect example of that fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, what's happened is I've built the relationships, and the team themselves have built the relationships. So I'm going to go back to the stamp community as an example, just because we ended up talking about it. But, you know, there are stamp shows that happen around Canada, because it's a Canadian focused stamp community, that they will meet up in person. And so, you know, those relationships are built to the kind of the point, like they've already decided this is the kind of space that they want. So, for example, I know people always laugh about this. We had controversies, for example, where what happens in stamps is it takes several years for a stamp to happen. And one member is very good about getting early photos of stamps that have yet to be released.
Ooh, exclusive.
Exclusive. And I'm telling you, this guy he always wants to be first. Like when I posted one the other day, he's like, you beat me by 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, I don't care. Like, I'm not trying to be first. Like, this is not, it's for him. It's about being first.
The
Anywho,
drama.
he knew someone at the post office, and he got early photos and he posted it. Now, Canada Post then sent me a message, said, hey, we're doing an unveil of this. It's taken us 4 years to get this. Do you mind to remove this? Then I was like, well, I don't work for Canada Post. This is a community. I had a discussion. We had an open discussion. Should we allow content like this? Mm-hmm. And then it was decided. People were like, what I like about your space is you don't spoil it. There are other communities that I can go to, because there are many stamp communities on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But yours is one I know that I will not get it spoiled. Because there's no spoil tag, right, on Facebook. It's kind of like,
right, it's there.
So we made a rule, basically, until Canada Post shows it on social media, you cannot post the photo in the group. But here's the thing. I had done a poll, and I had the majority of the community agree with me. So it was very easy to kind of say, we've decided collectively as a community, this isn't going to work. And therefore, now if anyone comes in and posts a photo before it's launched socially, it's kind of like I get message from people, and they message those folks and say, hey, you know the rules. It's like rule number 2. don't post these things. You know, and that's kind of you know, the kind of thing I kind of miss, and that also gets to why I miss not having a forum that would, you know, has spoiler tags and all those other features. But like I said, it's a hobby community, and you know, it's that passive thing. You're on, you know, these are very older individuals. Let's be honest. They're clicking photos of their grandkids, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to post about this stamp, and you know, a lot of the conversations are kind of fly by in that way. But you know, we have a lot of fun, and I think the thing that makes why I love it so much is it really keeps me grounded in what I love about community is that a lot of these collectors will talk about that they're getting very old, they're going to die, they don't know what's going to happen with their collection, and they make these connections with other people in the same town sometimes, and they're able to connect. And especially during COVID, I believe this community just exploded, because it was such a lifeline for all these isolated individuals who had an opportunity now to connect with other people over their joy of stamp collecting. And we did all kinds of, what do you call it? Secret Santa. We did all kinds of fun stuff just to keep people connected and have a lot of fun in that way. And like that to me was, pure bliss of community in that sense. And we're at like 1,200 members, so it's not an insignificant community. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I will tack on to the how do you get them to help you moderate.
Yeah.
When I worked in the gaming industry, which can be contentious and fraught with, as a community manager, what I did that seemed to work the best is I said, I laid out the rules. Here's the rules. If you break any of these rules, we're going to close this conversation down. You go off topic too far, we're closing the thread. And that was the threat. And people would, get invested in the conversation. Somebody would go off topic and they'd be like, hey, just don't go off topic, stay on topic because I like this conversation. I don't want it to end. And they would just self-police. It got to the point where I just didn't have to close anything anymore. And we had discussion threads that the other rule we had is once it hit 1,000 responses, we would close it, start a new conversation with the same title and reopen it because, at that point it was just hard to read. But we'd have some of these that would go 5,000 and 6,000 responses and it would just go. And, we wouldn't have to stop it. We wouldn't have to get in there and break it up or remove content because they were so good about keeping the conversation on target and not going off topic, not attacking each other. So it can be done. It's just, you can use some gamification in there, Pavlov's dog, to train them the way that you want them to behave. And it's a matter of you laugh, but that's all gamification is.
Yeah, I know.
so it's rewarding the behavior you want. And once you kind of get that set and they know the rules and it's all out there and you enforce it equally, set rules and enforce them equally, people will eventually figure it out. And then you get to the point where the older members will teach the new members that come in and maybe step outside the rules. They're good about jumping in and saying, hey, you can do that, but this is the way that you should do it. Or we don't do that. And we're just, let you know we don't do that. And your post is probably going to disappear, but that's why.
Well, one of the things I like to do is if I see someone, for example, the person said, you might want to remove this before Adrian sees it, that kind of thing. I like to reach out to them and say, thank you. It's really important to me because I want them to understand that I really appreciate that. I have a full-time job. I can't be in the community all the time.
Yeah.
And, we're in different time zones in different countries. And I've always found and also what Tim was talking about, bringing them in, right? Like telling them the behind the scenes, like, I've been very clear about that Canada Post is there, and this is their opportunity. Like, guys, if we make this a toxic place, if we turn it into where it's not fun and it's not valuable, then we're not going to have that say. They're not going to want to come here either. It doesn't mean that we're not critical of Canada Post. There's plenty of critical stuff about Canada Post, but it's always done in a respectful way. And I always kind of push the envelope a bit to say, well, what would be the solution? Like, I'm fine if you want to complain, but like, how do they solve it? Because, they obviously don't have a solution, or maybe they want to hear from you. And this is the best way that we can do it.
Okay. So we got a lightning question for you.
Sure.
Vienna, you want to ask it?
Yeah. So what do you think is going to be the hardest chapter for an accidental community manager or someone just starting in their career to implement? And what do you recommend is the first, I'm adding on to this, what do you recommend is the first step that they should take to solve that difficult to implement problem?
I just want to make sure I get the right chapter.
This is a lightning question, Adrian.
Lightning. So it's chapter 25.
Jeopardy theme, play the Jeopardy theme, chapter 25.
Chapter 25. So for those at home, that is listening to your health.
Oh.
I know it sounds funny, but that is, to me, I know it's not a cop-out, but I'll tell you why. New people think they can't take time off. They kill themselves, right? They kill themselves. They're like, I can't take a vacation. I can't take, my community's going to like explode. It's going to be over. What can I do? And to me, that's the hardest thing to implement and understand is that, and it gets to Carolyn's question about self-moderation and things. That stuff takes a long time to do. It's hard to do, but that's how you're able to go ahead and I can know, for example, next week I'm going to Vegas for the TSIA. And the stamp community will be okay that week. That I'm not able to go in there. That everything will be fine. Or if I decide I'm going to go on a cruise with my wife at some point, you know, that I don't have internet access, that things aren't going to burn down. But people that are new on community feel like they have to be 24/7,
365.
Yeah,
it gets scary.
Yeah, and as a line that my wife said to me repeatedly, she's a healthcare worker, and I say in the book too, no one is going to die. It's a really hard, you know, like, oh my God, I'm not. Okay, what's the worst that could happen? You have some spam. Okay, you'll deal with it when you get back. You know what I mean? Like, there's not, and if there's major, you know, drama, you know, hopefully you have some trust. I mean, the idea of implementation is hopefully you have some moderators that you trust, not like the one I told the story about that deleted all the content while I was sleeping, but, you know, someone you can trust who can either hide the content or have that conversation or use some judgment. And to me, that's the hardest thing. Anyone that's new, they just feel they can't walk away, that the weight is on them, that they've got to do all things. And I know there's also the joke in the community space, like vacation and community management doesn't go together. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, like, if you don't figure out how to take a vacation as a community manager, you're not going to take care of your health, and you're just going to be a shitty community manager.
Yeah.
Like,
I was gonna say, 9 years ago at one of my community manager run conferences, I had somebody come in and do breathing and stretching exercises with us and talk about health and wellness. And everybody thought I was nuts bringing somebody like that into a community manager conference. And
at the
end,
Nexus
everybody,
conference.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
At the Nexus conference, one of the sessions that ended the day was literally a conversation about how to take care of chickens. And it was one of the best sessions in the whole conference. Yeah, just absolutely incredible. But one of the things that I wanted to say about this as well, I really, really agree with this being one of the hardest things to implement. But I also think a lot of new community managers, they get so stressed with this idea of trying to prove community ROI because they focus on these metrics that are literally line goes up. They're just the engagement trap over and over again. And because the line might stagnate or, God forbid, go down, they start to attach that to their personal level of value and how they accomplish their personal jobs, which I think is so difficult and so fearful and so anxiety ridden that they just decide if that line ever goes down, which is going to happen when you take time off, they're doing a bad job. I think it's important that you separate the value of yourself personally from that line.
That's a really good point. And I think part of that health aspect too was early on. I mean, I guess it comes with time, with maturity. If someone was really mean or nasty to me in the community, I took it so personally, like it would ruin my weekend or and just be a miserable individual. And it's like I had to separate all that to kind of just be like, that stays there. Like, that's sometimes it's they're angry at the company. It's not me personally, but I'm just the representative, and I'm just the one that's going to get the shrapnel on that. And you're right about like metrics and things. Like if we're talking about the non-health aspect, yes, the metrics thing is a certainly thing. I'm hoping that I've given the frameworks to have that conversation, because my whole point of Cargo as well was to have the conversations before your boss says to you, why have we hired you? And why are we paying for this platform? Because I'm telling you, I've had this conversation. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I had this conversation, I would be on a paradise island somewhere. I'd still call in because I love David and Tim. But I'm just saying that it happens so frequently that we get these panic calls from people like, I need to now prove my value. And especially as a downturn in the economy is happening. And that's why my most urgent thing, of reason why I'm happy that this book is out here, is I want people to really drive those conversations with their bosses rather than waiting for their boss to come to them and say, 2023 is looking a little tight and we're going to have to make some reduction in workforce. And, we said we are going to get you some extra people, but we're not. Or, we're going to cancel your community program. And to me, like, if my dream is as an industry that we get to a point where the person that runs the community, if they resign or quit or whatever happens, they're so important to the company. They're as essential as any other role that someone would say, oh my God, how do we not have a VP of sales? How do we not have a VP? Like those jobs that they try to instantly. I've seen it way too many times that someone will leave a community role and they'll just try to make it go along, and they don't really hire, and they're doing like a committee, and then it lags for like 2 years, like a dog with a broken leg, and then eventually they shut it. And but it's really sad to see, because you're like, this is a great community, and there wasn't really what's the word I'm looking for? a sense of urgency to fill the role, as there would be in other departments. And I think part of that gets to the value of the community wasn't made all the way to the top of like, if the community is like a driver of NPS or satisfaction, or whatever those things are that you're doing, that person leaving, it's like, oh my God, like we have to replace it. Like I just find it's kind of like, oh well, it was kind of a nice to have, they're gone, so we'll just hope it's
We'll
runs.
live.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen way too often.
Yeah. Well, this is Adrian. Thank you so much for being here. And if we can just ask Carolyn and Vienna, just if you would each give like just your name, your company, and where people can get in touch with you really quick, because we're already over our hour, and then we'll have Adrian give information on his book.
Sure. So my name is Venia, and I built a company called sociallyconstructed.online, which consults with companies and then sets community managers and then teaches those community managers how to build their communities social scientifically. As a part of that, we also teach iteratively with the Information Diet Book Club, which meets every Thursday at noon and is actually going to start reading Adrian's book next Thursday. So if you're interested, go ahead and hop in. And Carolyn, I know you already read it, but you should read with us.
Oh yeah, totally. So I'm Carolyn Zick. I'm the founder of Bad Axe Enterprises. I'm going to drop in the chat over on YouTube my link to my community. I'm a social marketing nerd and brand new community builder, 1.5 years into the industry. I work with business owners and community organizations that want to be intentional and impactful with their online presences in a way that's non-detrimental to mental health. So Adrian, I super appreciate all of your approach in your book about planning communities and developing things that are supportive of your brains. Because if we don't have brains, we're not going to have a community.
All right, Adrian.
Well, I mean, I'm Adrian Speyer, of course. This is the book. It's called The Accidental Community Manager. You can go to my website, adrianspeyer.com. There's links to buy the book, social media, all the places. I also have a newsletter around the book if you'd like to join. And I have one ask of anyone that's read the book that would like to leave a review. I really appreciate it, because I want as many people to know about this book. And as I always say, you don't buy things on Amazon without reviews. So the more reviews that I can have, and hopefully 5-star reviews, please, that is very helpful to get the word out and let people know about this book. It's really important to me. And I just want to thank you all for being here and creating the space for have the conversation about the book.
No, thank you. And I just want to say really quick, if you're watching on YouTube or not, or go over there and watch, and we would love it if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, but not a requirement. But if you leave a comment and let me know if you haven't read his book and really just can't afford to buy it, the 3 people on there, I will be happy to buy a book for. So just make sure that you leave your name and let me respond to you so that I can get your address and where to send it. And I will be happy to give it to you in the format that you would like. And in exchange for that, I would kindly ask that you leave Adrian a 5-star review. Or a review that might be 5 stars if you feel it necessary.
I only want it if people feel that it's worthy.
There you go. All right, Tim, where can people get a hold of you?
Oh, I'm at TA McDonald on Twitter. And I work at homeroom.club, and we are a community management solutions as a service company. And I am in charge of strategy and content for our company.
Very good. And I'm David Dewald, community manager at Siena.com. I want to thank our guests and my co-host Tim McDonald for joining us today. And thank you to our audience. Specifically want to call out Jeffrey, Kat, Bridget, and Shai. And if you enjoyed this, as Tim said, please like, subscribe, follow on the platform of your choice. If you would like to be a guest on an upcoming episode, or you have a topic you would like us to cover, please head over to thecommunitymanager.com, click the About Us page, hit the Contact Us page, and just drop in a note and let us know what you'd like to see. Again, thank you to our guests, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. And we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to be talking to some community coaches and community professionals that work for other people. We're going to talk to them and find out how they do it and what they do and what we can do to make them, work with them in the future. And I just rambled through that whole thing. Thank you again, everybody. We'll talk to you later. And I'll take us.